Hello everyone, I am Jonathan Little for PokerNews.com. I hope you're having a fantastic day. We're going to continue going through a hand that one of my students played in a $550 buy-in World Poker Tour event. This student got into this game by me backing them at my training site, PokerCoaching.com. If you are a subscriber, we pick people each month to back into live poker tournaments, usually between $500 buy-in and $1,000 buy-in events. So, if you are a PokerCoaching.com member, under the community section, make sure you apply to be backed, because I want to take my money and give it to you and let you play tournaments that you perhaps otherwise would not be able to play. And interestingly enough, this student ended up cashing, so congrats to them. Let's take a look at this hand where everyone folds around to the cutoff. This is our hero with ace-10 playing pretty deep stacked, but the big blind only has 50 big blinds. This is definitely a spot just to raise, make a standard raise at 2.2 big blinds. Button calls and big blind calls. Flop comes king, 6-4, all diamonds, and our hero has the ace of diamonds. So ace of diamonds, 10 of hearts on king, 6-4, three ways. I would probably just go ahead and bet here. Whenever you do make a continuation bet in this scenario, you're going to get a lot of hands with equity to fold. And even if you do get raised, it's not really the end of the world because we have the nut flush draw. It would be better if we were in position and then, like, say, we were on the button and let's say the small blind and big blind called, but it's fine just to go ahead and bet. Our hand generally lacks showdown value because if we do check this on the flop and then check it on the turn and check it on the river, we're probably going to lose a lot of the time. So betting to clean up our equity and give ourselves additional bluffing opportunities on future streets, I think works out pretty well. In this scenario, I do think you do want to make a medium to large size bet. So pot's 8 big blinds, and our hero makes a 6.8 big blind bet. I think that's probably a tiny bit too big, but certainly reasonable. And then the player in the big blind check raises to 18.6 big blinds. So what you want to do here is you always want to check out your pot odds, right? How often do we need to win, or how often do we need to get there on the turn to justify calling? So here we have to put in 18.6 minus our bet, which is 6.8 equals. So we need to put in 11.8 big blinds into a pot that's going to be 18.6 times 2 plus the previous pot, which was 8, right? So we have to put in, let's get out our calculator again. Well, we're trying to figure out the total pot here. 18.6 times 2 equals plus 8 equals. So we have to put in, what did I say? 12 divided by 45, right? 12 divided by 45 roughly equals 26%. So we need to get there on the turn about 26% of the time to justify calling. Now, you want to ask how many diamonds are left in the deck. In this scenario, there are 9 diamonds left in the deck. Do we think the 10 is, or the ace is good as well? Maybe. So there are 9 diamonds left, and there are roughly 45 cards remaining in the deck. So 9 divided by 45 is 20%. So we're not quite getting the right pot odds, right? We need to win 26% of the time, but we're only going to win about 20% of the time. So if we thought we could not get any more money in this pot when a diamond comes, we should fold. However, the opponent has 30 big blinds remaining in his stack, 29. And for that reason, I think we do need to stick around. And you may say, should we be thinking about all this at the poker table? That seems like a bit much. Well, in reality, if you have experience playing poker, you will generally know in this scenario, when you have a flush draw on the flop to the nuts, when you get check raised, you're just not folding. Because, first off, we're always going to be getting, or usually going to be getting roughly the right pot odds. Also, it's going to go, our opponent's going to check the turn, and we're going to check behind, and then we're going to get to see the river sometimes, which allows us to realize additional equity, right? So it's not as if we are straight up drawing, getting the exact pot odds we are getting, because your opponent's just, first off, you're not always going to miss, and your opponent's not always going to keep just betting on the turn every single time, right? Also, for all we know, the opponent could be check raising a hand like queen of diamonds, jack, or queen with a jack of diamonds, or something like that we actually beat. So in this scenario, you should know if you have a decent amount of experience in poker that you're just not folding. You may say, should we go all in? Your opponent can't have the nuts, right? Because we have the ace of diamonds, so should we just bluff all in? And I think the answer to that is no. Unless you know your opponent loves to check raise the flop and also loves to fold if you shove all in, just assuming that you must have the nuts. I will point out that I think that if we did have like ace-10 of diamonds here, I'm not exactly sure if we need to be jamming or calling against a lot of players. If your opponents are check raising with a whole lot of marginal made hands, like let's say king 5 offsuit on king 6-4, that are just looking to find out where they stand, and they assume that if you go all in, they must be beat, meaning they'll fold. Well, in that scenario, we really don't want to be jamming because we really want to keep our opponent in with king 5 whenever they're drawing to run a runner for a full house or quads, which doesn't happen all that often. That said, if your opponent does have a lot of hands like king 5 offsuit that will never put any more money in on a diamond turn, but will call it off on the flop, well then getting it all in immediately is great. So this is a very player-dependent scenario, especially when the opponent still has 29 big blinds left in their stack, because that's not, that's a tiny amount, right? So a lot of players get in their minds, they just want to like look at a GTO solver in this spot and do whatever it says, but realize that's probably not a good strategy because most players are not check raising the flop with a GTO range. And even if you have ideas of how your opponent's going to play against a shove all in, you don't really know, right? And that leads to a lot of errors where you input the wrong information into the solver. And I get the idea that you have to start somewhere. You have to make a lot of assumptions, but realize that you probably don't know as much about your opponent's strategy as you may think that you know about your opponent's strategy, right? I have some students who every time they come to me, they give me these really, really specific reads on their opponents. And I'm like, oh, great, you know a lot about your opponent. How long have you been playing with them? Like, oh, all day. I've been playing with them all day for the last 6 hours. Like, look, if you've been playing with someone for 6 hours, you don't know much at all about their flop, turn, or river strategy. You might know a lot about their pre-flop strategy, and you may have ideas about their flop strategy, but you may have seen them play, what, 3 or 4 or 5 rivers, right? To where you're just guessing. You're straight up guessing. So realize what you know and what you don't know, and then make adjustments one way or the other based on that. I would say in general, whenever your opponent check raises to about 40% of their stack on the flop, they probably aren't folding if you jam. So if they're not folding if you jam, well, we don't want to jam, right? Because we would then just be putting all of our money in with 40% equity. It's almost like we're kind of calling it off with 40% equity if we assume we have very little fold equity, which I'm going to make the assumption if the opponent's putting in 40% of their stack, we probably don't have much fold equity. So do you want to call it off in this scenario when you are just straight up behind? Because if we do get it all in immediately, we're going to be behind a whole lot of kings and a whole lot of flushes, or maybe sets. So we don't really want to get it in. So since we don't want to get it in, I think calling is the only play that makes sense. So we do call. Turns of 4, opponent now goes all in for 30 big blinds. If we call, pot will go up to 105. So we would now have to put in 30 to win 105 with our flush draw, which means we need to win 28% of the time to break even. And we're going to get there about 18-ish% of the time on the river. So 18 is way less than the required 28. So now, basing this turn all in, we have an easy fold. Again, a lot of people get it in their minds, oh my gosh, I have the nut flush draw. My opponent could be bluffing with the queen high flush draw or the jack high flush draw. I mean, they could, but most likely in this scenario, the opponent just has a premium hand they are trying to protect and or get value from. So now, even though we have the nut flush draw on the flop, we have to fold, and that is what our hero does. So I like the way our hero played this hand. I think he could have bet a little bit smaller on the flop. That would have resulted in the opponent check raising smaller, giving hero better implied odds and immediate pot odds, right? But besides that, I think this was a nicely played hand. I think a lot of people get in their minds whenever they have a strong draw. They think, all right, I just need to get it all in immediately because that ensures I get to see the turn in the river. And while it does ensure you get to see the turn in the river, it also ensures whenever you're behind and your opponent calls off, you're just putting loads and loads and loads of money in behind. And you really don't want to be putting in a lot of money behind. So in scenarios like this, the right play very often is to call the flop raise, see what develops, and go from there. And especially in tournaments where you cannot reload if you go broke, you really just don't want to be playing big pots over and over and over again. Even as a small favorite, even more so whenever you are 40% to get there. So you're going to find that in general, playing small-ish pots, especially once the opponent has shown that they are very interested in the pot, is ideal. You don't want to just be getting it all in against a strong range, because then you're getting it in behind, and when you get it in behind over and over, I mean, sometimes you win, but more often than not, you do not. So that's going to be it for today. Again, head over to pokercoaching.com. You can get a completely free trial membership there, and if you become a full member, you can apply for backing, and maybe I'll pick you to represent me in the next live poker tournament in your area. So check that out at pokercoaching.com. Good luck in your games. Have fun. Thanks for watching this on Poker News. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know.